Welcome to a deep dive dedicated to understanding the complex machinery of human civilization. Our mission today is deceptively simple. We're trying to uncover the true global architects and the defining tools of the field that studies us sociology.
Exactly. We're synthesizing sources on the founding figures and the frameworks that, once you really get them, let you instantly see the difference between a small personal setback and a massive public issue.
We are tracing an intellectual lineage that spans centuries and continents, moving from these, huge macro theorists who tried to define entire societies, all the way to the practitioners who took those ideas and applied them on the ground.
Yeah, and if you thought the origin story of sociology was settled history, you should get ready to challenge that conventional narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this by first asking the foundational question. Who really founded sociology? Because for decades, the answer in Western textbooks was, well, one name, Auguste Comte.
And that's where we have to start. Comte's influence in the 19th century was absolutely pivotal for formalizing the discipline. As a French philosopher, he's widely recognized as the father for establishing positivism.
Right.
He basically argued that we have to move beyond just speculation and apply the rigorous, systematic methods of the natural sciences, like physics or biology, to the study of society. He wanted to find universal social laws.
So he was looking for scientific proof in a field that was, up to that point, mostly philosophy.
Precisely. His famous law of three stages really shows this ambition. He said human thought evolves in a sequence. First, the theological stage, where we explain things through gods or spirits.
Okay.
Then the metaphysical, using abstract ideas. And finally, the positive or scientific stage. And for him, sociology was the crowning achievement of that positive science.
He also gave the field its first real methodology, right? This idea of social statics and social dynamics.
That's it. Social statics is how social structures hold together, and social dynamics is how society changes over time.
That sounds like a really solid starting point for a science, but our sources immediately complicate this, jumping back 5 centuries to the 14th century and introducing Ibn Khaldun. This just completely upends the timeline.
It really does. I mean, when you read the sources, it's impossible to ignore Ibn Khaldun. He was an Arab historian, a philosopher, a diplomat.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah. And his 14th century work, the Muqaddimah, it systematically outlines a way to understand societies and political history that is just startlingly empirical. He was writing about this stuff centuries before the Enlightenment figures we usually credit.
So the sources are basically arguing he should be seen as a co-founder, or at least a foundational antecedent to Comte.
Absolutely. It's a push for a much more global understanding of where the discipline actually came from.
What strikes me about Khaldun is that his method sounds, almost more modern than Comte's. It wasn't just about big ideas, it was about observation.
His methodology was intensely empirical. It was rooted in his direct experience observing the rise and fall of political entities across North Africa and the Middle East. He wasn't focused on intellectual stages like Comte. He was focused on the actual engine of civilization.
Which he saw as the cyclical nature of history.
Exactly. And the key concept driving that engine is Asabiyyah.
Right, that's a term that gets thrown around a lot. What did Khaldun actually mean by it, by social cohesion, and how did it drive this cycle?
Asabiyyah is best understood as group solidarity or social cohesion, but it's more than that. It's the collective will and the bond that drives a community to act together. Khaldun saw it as the absolute driving force.
Okay.
A group with strong Asabiyyah, often, he said, desert or nomadic groups, rises to power because of their unity, their simplicity, their shared hardship. They conquer established, softer civilizations.
And then the cycle begins. The very strength that brought them to victory starts to erode the minute they become successful.
Exactly. This is the truly insightful part. Once the conquering group establishes a state and achieves luxury, that hardship disappears. The rulers become decadent, focusing on personal pleasure. And so the cohesion, the Asabiyyah, starts to weaken.
They become dependent on others.
Right, on mercenaries, on external forces, and eventually a new, younger group with powerful Asabiyyah emerges from the periphery to overthrow them, and the whole cycle just repeats itself.
That is a phenomenal structural lens, a grand theory. Okay, so let's transition into the actual formalization of the field. If Comte established the idea of social science, Émile Durkheim, another French intellectual, was the one who really fought for its independence.
Durkheim's mission was explicit. He needed to define sociology not just as an interesting subject, but as a distinct and autonomous science, separate from philosophy and the new science of psychology.
And to do that, he needed a unique object of study.
Right. He agreed with Comte that it had to be empirical, but he needed something unique to justify the field's existence. And that unique object is the social fact.
That term is a little abstract. What does it mean in practice?
A social fact is anything that exists external to you, to the individual, but exerts a coercive power over you. The key is that it's external. It's things like currency, legal systems, moral rules.
Things you didn't invent, but you have to follow.
Exactly. You have to follow them to participate in society. It's a force. If you decide a social fact like, say, the speed limit doesn't apply to you, well, society rapidly corrects you.
Right.
Durkheim insisted sociology should be holistic. We shouldn't study the individual mind. We should study the social environment that molds the mind.
And the most compelling illustration of this, which really changed the game, was his analysis of suicide. I mean, most people see that as the ultimate private, deeply personal act.
And that's exactly why Durkheim chose it. By studying variations in suicide rates across different groups. For example, observing lower rates among married versus single people, or comparing Catholic versus Protestant communities, he showed that even this act was influenced by collective societal conditions.
So he shifted the focus from individual tragedy to structural consequence.
Yes. He isolated two key social variables that dictated the rate. Social integration, which is how attached you feel to your groups, and social regulation, the amount of control society exerts over you.
So too little integration, and you get one kind of problem.
Right. You get egoistic suicide, a feeling of being completely detached, but too much regulation, and you get fatalistic suicide, feeling utterly oppressed, like a prisoner. He used statistics to prove that the structure of society determined the probability of this outcome. That was his scientific justification for the whole field.
That ability to connect structure to personal outcomes is clearly the core skill. So let's look at two essential tools developed later that let us do that. First, Robert K. Merton's approach to functions.
Merton was refining the functionalist perspective, which sees society as a system of interconnected parts. But he realized early functionalism was too optimistic. It sort of assumed everything worked together harmoniously.
The functional unity fallacy.
Exactly. So Merton introduced the concept of manifest and latent functions to reveal complexity and contradiction.
Okay, so if we look at something like the criminal justice system, what's the manifest function?
The manifest function is the obvious, intended one, to punish lawbreakers and deter crime. It's conscious and recognized.
And the latent functions.
Those are the unconscious, unintended, or unrecognized impacts. It could be something like reinforcing economic stratification, or, ironically, it could be providing legitimate employment for thousands of lawyers, judges, and prison guards.
And Merton said these can be dysfunctional.
Yeah, that's the key. They can undermine social stability or perpetuate inequality, even if the manifest purpose is good. By demanding that sociologists look for those hidden consequences, Merton kept the field critical.
That reveals the hidden mechanics of institutions. Now let's pivot to the tool that has maybe the greatest daily relevance for you, the listener. C. Wright Mills's sociological imagination.
This is the critical perspective. This is the superpower you gain from studying this material. Mills defined the sociological imagination as the ability to see the link between your personal life experience, your biography, and the larger impersonal forces of history and social structure.
So it's a forced zoom out. You stop seeing just your own tree and start seeing the entire forest and the weather patterns affecting it.
Exactly. The central task is making the distinction between a personal trouble and a public issue. Let's take student loan debt. If you, as one person, have a lot of debt because you chose an expensive private school, Mills might say that's a personal trouble.
Potentially your own choices.
Right. But if we zoom out and see that millions of people hold trillions of dollars in non-dischargeable debt, and it's affecting marriage rates and homeownership for an entire generation.
That is unequivocally a public issue.
It's rooted in the structure of the national economy, in policy changes. It's a structural problem, not just a bunch of individual failings. And when you understand that structural cause, you can advocate for structural change.
That moves sociology from just theory to direct action, which brings us perfectly to our final section. The American pioneers who took these theories and used them to drive reform. Jane Addams and W.E.B. Du Bois.
These two really solidified the move toward applied activist sociology in the U.S. Jane Addams was so much more than a philanthropist. She was a sociological pioneer. In 1889, she co-founded Hull House in Chicago to provide services to poor immigrant families.
She was literally doing the field work that Comte and Durkheim theorized about.
Precisely. She was a charter member of the American Sociological Society. Her work was foundational to the Chicago School of Sociology. Her Hull House maps and papers from 1893 used data and cartography to show the link between urban living conditions, poverty, and mortality rates.
So she wasn't just helping people, she was collecting the data to prove why the conditions existed.
Yes, but she's a complex figure. Our sources are clear about her association with eugenics.
Which is, deeply challenging to grapple with.
It is. She supported eugenics, which was unfortunately a progressive trend embraced by many thinkers at the time. She served as vice president of an association that advocated for it to eliminate disease and social ills. It's a stark example of how even the most reform-minded thinkers can get entangled in the flawed scientific trends of their era.
We see a similar critical complexity with W.E.B. Du Bois, who focused his empirical lens directly on systemic racism.
Du Bois was the true empirical activist. His 1899 work, The Philadelphia Negro, was a landmark, the first case study of a Black community based on rigorous sociological field research. He used interviews, statistics, observation, everything.
And he popularized the core structural concept of the color line.
Absolutely. The color line became the defining metaphor for the injustice of segregation. He targeted lynching, discrimination, and crucially, he connected racism back to structural economic systems, often seeing capitalism as a primary cause.
And like Addams, his story has a complicated relationship with the eugenics debate of the time.
He did. Now, he was a fierce opponent of racist eugenics, the kind that defined Black people as an inherently lower race. But he did support the underlying principle of it, arguing that encouraging the most talented members of all races to procreate would improve the stocks of humanity.
Which again just shows how difficult it was to escape the pervasive scientific frameworks of the early 20th century.
Even for thinkers dedicated to social justice.
What an incredible journey. We've traced sociology's history from Khaldun defining the rise and fall of empires, to Durkheim making the case for a standalone science, and finally to Addams and Du Bois providing the activist framework here in the U.S.
And we've seen that sociology wasn't invented by one person or one nation. It emerged globally, blending these sweeping theories of civilization with meticulous scientific methods and pragmatic, action-oriented fieldwork.
Ultimately, the most powerful takeaway is that whether we're talking about Merton's latent dysfunctions or Mill's connecting biography to history, the greatest tool they pass down is the ability to look past the surface, to see the hidden structural engines driving our collective lives.
C. Wright Mills described the sociological imagination as both terrible and magnificent. It's terrible because it reveals the immense power of social forces over the seemingly private details of your life. But it's magnificent because it gives you the specific knowledge required to challenge and maybe even transform those forces.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought straight from Mills. Now that you have this lens, what part of your own personal experience, your biography, is now magnificently revealed to be a public issue you are structurally equipped to address?